Is in an abusive black leadership relationship.
We have to send a message. This is the time for us to send a message.
We're always talking about what the Republicans ain't done for us or what they will do to hurt us. My life has been hurt by Democrats.
And we got in our mind that we always got to keep voting Democrat.
You know, look and see in your community, who are the real oppressors in our community? They always talk about black on black crime. And when you hear the word black on black crime, the first thing you think of is a black man robbing you, a black man breaking in your house. And that is a black on black crime. But let's take it one step further. There's a black on black crime down in City Hall. There's a black on black crime down in all the state capitals in America, where black folks are voting against our interests, where black folks are voting and making us, we're getting poor and poor, and other groups are getting richer and richer.
Everywhere you go, there's poverty in black areas.
This is a lot where I stand at right now. I had to be real. It's what public housing residents should live in. Most of the people are homeless, living in the street. And it's because of you, Mr. President.
In Detroit, where your leaders at? There's no white folks running Detroit, cutting water on black folks in Detroit. Them black folks running that city. Ain't no white folks doing that. Them black folks going along with that. Everything's happening in our community is black leadership doing this.
Our children know that if the Democrats have not done anything for us as of yet, why should they even go out and vote? What agenda is on the table that's going to change their life?
The only thing they're offering the black community is abortion on demand. This is what the president asking for us to vote for.
Now he wants to have this conversation about minimum wage raise because he knows that this is the way to get a lot of the poor people's attention. But to hell with his minimum wage raise. We don't have any jobs. A minimum wage raise for what?
They're not pushing a black agenda. They're not pushing a family agenda. They're pushing a neoliberal agenda.
Across this city, in these major democratic cities, this is what it looks like.
How can the same process happen over and over again and nobody got nothing, can't do nothing about it?
Black leadership is abusing us. The Democratic Party is abusing us.
It's the same way in every black community across the country.
And they force us into a life of welfare. We don't want no welfare. We want opportunities to go to work. We want opportunities to own business. They bailed out all of the major banks and these big investors, but left the people starving.
There are no tea parties in your city.
We don't have those people. We have a major democratic machine, and the majority of them, they look like me. These are the people who make sure we get nothing, but then turn around and have us to vote for them again.
They only come around when it's time for elections. Or they think they can give you a toy or give you a turkey or something, and then everything is good.
Hundreds of millions of dollars are coming down from the federal government. But the money is going to all these special interest groups. My brother's keeper went to his friends. This whole corrupt democratic system that gobbles up all the dollars and starves the people out. Can you all look around your community and see any change that will come about with these hundreds of billions of dollars that will come through our cities? No, you cannot. What we do see is our elected officials riding around in new cars, and they have new homes.
When our people don't have jobs in our communities, when we don't have any vital resources, when all the deals been cut, and all our people are left out, this is where we end up.
And we got the most important thing that we got that we can stop all this. Everybody got to vote. And if you use your vote wisely, you can stop a lot of this stuff.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Kari Ilonummi. This is the November monthly report for 2014 and NoSpinNewsSource.com. Welcome to the show once again. Now today we have lots of video, we have commentary, breaking news, economic variables, bikers versus ISIS, secretive X-37B military spy plane, comments of Dick Cheney, President Obama, Russian relations with the United States, and comments made by what would be their Prime Minister, Medvedev, regarding Obama, and so much more. Now, you've noticed the beginning of what would be the report today was very powerful, as we had African Americans from places such as Detroit and other parts of the nation discussing what they thought, what they believe regarding politics and the situation now. And apparently they're not very delighted with what would be the Democratic Party and what would be specifically Barack Obama. So we have different issues to discuss. We had a school shooting here recently regarding a 14-year-old teenager in Marysville, Washington, 7 miles approximately from where I reside. Also, I was forced to use a gun in self-defense merely 2 weeks ago approximately as well, in an alleyway walking my dog less than 2 blocks from my own personal home. So it's a very interesting time in which we live in. Nonetheless, thank God for my 45 that I had on my side. Still going strong, and here once again looking handsome for another monthly report. So on with the news. Here we go. We have Vladimir Putin lashed out at the United States and the West for destabilizing the world order of checks and balances for its own gains. He also accused the West of inflaming the situation in the Ukraine and said that Russia is not interested in building an empire. No refusal OVI checkpoints are planned for Clark County, Ohio for potential DUIs. What is a no refusal checkpoint? That means you get pulled over against what would be your constitutional rights without ever probable cause, without ever swerving or going over a line or doing anything in which should get you pulled over for under the circumstances of keeping everybody safe, which is a different story. This, what would be no refusal checkpoint, is something in which when the police do this, and it's happened in other states and whatnot, pretty across the nation, that you are forced to pull your car over, deal with the police, be treated as a criminal, and even forced to give what would be a blood or other specimen in which they choose, breathalyzer or whatnot, in order to see if you have been drinking or under the influence or not. A Washington, D.C. jury has convicted one former Blackwater guard of murder and 3 more from the private military company of voluntary manslaughter in connection with the infamous 2007 shooting in Baghdad that left 14 civilians dead and 17 others injured. So this is a beginning of what would be some of these bad folks and these private armies and variables to see some of their comeuppance and things come at their way as well. So that was one of the things that they tried to do, doing this private army and these Blackwater and these other groups, was trying to get away from Geneva Conventions and other rules of war, but step by step, what would be things are coming and justice is coming for them. And as folks, contractors and people see that certain folks of Blackwater and whatnot are being convicted of crimes such as rape and murder and things, atrocities that have been done over the years, that will send a signal of fear to other contractors and folks that decide they want to go against the rules of engagement and Geneva Conventions as well. Obama repeats, "You can't get Ebola on a bus," the day after a bus was quarantined in D.C. for Ebola-like symptoms and scare. Bloomberg and Gates background check is the first ploy to registration and confiscation, according to an article that's out as well. I agree 100%. That's what it all is about. Background checks and this is and that. And it's always in the name of the children. It's always in the name of security. It's always in the name of something nice and whatnot. But really that's what it is a way of playing upon your heart and ignorance to get you to sign away and throw away your own constitutional right to bear arms, which according to the Constitution, quote, shall not be infringed, unquote. That even means for the women, the children, the elderly, and security reasons, shall not be infringed, still applies. So, Lavrov of Russia says that U.S. must stop acting like global prosecutor, judge, and executioner. That's probably a fair assessment. UK-Russian relations, quote, close to bottom to remain low for a long time, unquote, according to Survey Lavrov as well. Obama's credit card declined at a New York restaurant. That's right. Looks like you don't even have the best credit either. Now, I've mentioned in the past that the United States created once upon a time what would be the beginning variables, the seeds of what today is ISIS and ISIL, the Mujahideen, and the bad folks across what would be the world. Or should I say, I guess they're now here in the United States, according to local sheriffs and folks, and even in Mexico too, and we'll show you some footage and information of that coming up in the show. But interestingly enough, how about if I had what would be your next, most likely, president, Hillary Clinton? What if I have video footage of her showing and telling you that once upon a time we funded and created the Mujahideen and what would be the Wahhabist variable of Islam, which is all about raping, murdering, Sharia law, killing off people in the name of the Lord, this and that. Sounds kind of ungodly to me. Anyways, what if I told you I had video footage of her saying that? That'd be a major credible factor for me, wouldn't it? Hillary Clinton? Let's check out Hillary Clinton and see what she has to say, and we'll check you out after this break.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work. And it was President Reagan in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these Mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated, they lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, we're sanctioning you. So we stopped dealing with the Pakistani military and with ISI, and we now are making up for a lot of lost time.
And welcome back to the show. Now, as I mentioned a few months ago, people ask for proof. Where's the proof? Where's the proof, Kari? I'm giving you proof these days. I'm having Obama tell you. I'm having the Democrat African Americans from Detroit and Chicago and places that voted and were with Obama 6 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago during re-election time, tell you. I'm having Hillary Clinton, which is 99% chance going to be your next president of the United States of America. That's right. These are credibility factors. But what's funny is many people out there, even when I give them the proof, kind of like the mailman downtown, they go into a case of dementia in which they just kind of float away on a cloud and just choose not to deal with reality. Well, that's many folks these days. I see more number 12th man flags for the Seahawks hanging off of people's cars and homes and businesses more than I do the American flag these days. So apparently many of you have lost faith in your nation, your government, the future of mankind. The only thing you have left now is a football game. Boy, I hate to see what happens when these guys lose. Now, the United States has withheld assurance from Germany that the Ebola virus, among other related diseases, would not be weaponized in the event that Germany exporting it to the United States Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases when this occurs. Now, the German MFA deputy head of division for export control, Marcus Klinger, provided a paper to the United States Consulate's economics office, quote, seeking additional assurances related to a proposed export of extremely dangerous pathogens, unquote. Germany subsequently made 2 follow-up requests and clarifications to the Army, according to the unclassified WikiLeaks cable. Quote, this matter concerns the complete genome of viruses such as the Zaire Ebola virus, the Lake Victoria Marburg virus, the Machupo virus, and the Lassa virus, which are absolutely among the most dangerous pathogens in the world, unquote, the request states. Germany's intel agency says that MH Malaysia Airlines 17 was downed by Ukraine militia. That's right. Remember how they were instantly blaming Russia? Well, apparently it was the Ukraine folks that did that, not Russia. And once again, we heard in what would be Sweden lately that there was what we believe a distress signal by a Russian submarine out there and what would be everybody has came forth publicly and folks in the government after information requests, and they have shown that that was fabricated. There was absolutely nothing to that. There was no German sub out, or excuse me, there was no Russian submarine out there at all. So they're throwing everything they can, including flat out degradations, lies, insults, anything, insinuations, whatever, anything to get us to turn against the people of the United States, to turn against Russia. Very interesting, and the world as well, not just the United States. They're trying to make them look bad. The magic that President Obama once enjoyed at political rallies appears to have vanished into thin air as a crowd of spectators walked out on the president during a speech for Democrats a couple Sundays ago in what would be Maryland. During appearances of Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, who was running for governor of Maryland, he stated ultimately, quote, early departures of crowd members while he spoke underscored his continuing unpopularity, well, what would be according to the Reuters reports during the event in which these folks were there, these candidates and forum was happening. A steady stream of people walked out of the auditorium while he spoke, the wire service noted, and a heckler interrupted Obama's remarks. Oh, isn't that sad? Obama's EIA states that there's enough coal in the United States to meet the demand for at least the next 222 years. And you know, coming from the Obama administration, that number has to be probably half of what it is in real life. And I have heard estimates from other more credible factors than the Obama administration, which doesn't take too much credibility to have more credibility than them, if you haven't noticed the past 6 years, that ultimately we have enough for at least 500 to 1,000 years of coal on stock within the United States alone. So what does Obama do? We wonder, first of all, how many mistakes does this president have to make continually? How many high crimes and misdemeanors, impeachable offenses, so on and so forth? How many deals with the devil, the queen, or Ebola, whomever, does this president have to do before people start to get it in their heads? These aren't continually incompetence and mistakes. This is intentional. This is a destruction of the sovereignty of the United States. And I'm going to say it right here today. That's right. Kari Ilonummi of NoSpinNewsSource.com, going to be running for Congress here shortly, is stating it here today on the record. What is happening is a fire sale. We are being destroyed. We are being systematically dismantled into a New World Order governance instead of the nation state in which our Constitution typifies. Now this is very profound. This is intense. This is too much for many of you to believe. Bush was a part of this. Obama is a part of this. We just see what would be the rollout speeding up and progressing. I assure you, with Hillary Clinton next, or what would be Jeb Bush. That's right, it's probably going to be a Hillary Clinton for the Democrat side or a Jeb Bush for the Republicans. So once again, you get a Clinton, Obama for the Democrats, or you get another Bush for the Republican. Talk about damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, it looks like our nation's going to be settling for voting for the better of two evils once again. You don't mind that, though. I noticed that that ultimately it is what it is. So we have the destruction of the United States happening before us. What's happening is absolutely intentional. The president knowingly, wittingly is helping to destroy the United States of America. Many of you voted for this president not just once, but twice. Most of you do not want to talk about this because in order to blame this president, you have to accept a certain amount of ignorance as well. You have to come to the understanding and acceptance to publicly state, and first within yourself, that you got swindled, you got hustled, you got lied, you got pimped and played by President Obama. You were the idiots. You were the fools. Most of you don't want to accept that yet. So until you do, you're probably just going to watch the Seahawks sports games and let Obama continue to do what he does, which is what many of the Republicans are doing. They're letting Obama get away with this and not even discussing impeachment because Obama is making the Democrats, or excuse me, making what would be the Republicans look good. So they just let him get away with this and think, oh, it's okay. This will help us out for our future campaigns as well. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. And the Republicans, as far as I'm concerned, are in bed with Obama just as much as any of the rest of them, because if nothing else, they capitulate and allow him to get away with this. And that is a very unfortunate state of affairs, but it is reality. Now, Ben Swan questions what would be Reverend Jesse Jackson over his claims regarding racism in the Ebola treatment of the Texas patient that came in from West Africa. Now, it's funny. Every time something happens and it's a black person that's a victim, sometimes we find out they weren't even victimized at all, but they become a victim in the story, and it's always racism, racism, racism. They always pull the race card, and it does hit the heart, and it does have effects. So let's see this interview of Ben Swan right now and discuss this and look at this if Reverend Jesse Jackson was accurate, if racism is at play, why the individual in Texas did not receive what would be the Ebola treatment and diagnosis in which he should have received. And we'll get back to you after this break. Thank you.
Well, media has been consumed with stories about the Ebola virus for weeks. Among the discussion have been claims that the first victim to die of the virus here in the United States died because of racism. Thomas Eric Duncan died last Wednesday. The claims of racism have been made by the Dallas County Commissioner John Wiley Price and by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who wrote in the Huffington Post, quote, "Duncan has a foreign accent, black skin, and no health insurance. From a theological perspective, Thomas Eric Duncan is one of our brothers described by Jesus as the least of these. So what role did his lack of privilege play in the treatment he received?" End quote. So the big question, is racism or a lack of privilege responsible for Duncan's death? I had the chance to speak earlier with the Reverend Jesse Jackson about his claims and asked him if there is any evidence that Duncan died from neglect.
There's substantial evidence in the neglect of Eric Thomas. That is Thomas Eric Duncan. There are 3 protocols the CDC set out. One was identification. If you're from West Africa, Guinea, Liberia, or Sierra Leone, that should be a signal. That's the epicenter of the Ebola crisis. Second was diagnosis, to do thorough blood tests and test. He was out there in 4 hours. That did not happen. The third was safe, secure, and quick treatment. That did not happen. Besides the fact he did not have health insurance. And so all the protocols were missed. So he, for about 8 days, he didn't get treatment, and he died unnecessarily.
Let me ask you about a couple of those particular issues. For instance, you say that Duncan was treated differently because he was sent home in that initial visit. According to the hospital, he didn't state that he was from Liberia. He specifically said no to questions about whether he had cared for a patient with the deadly virus, which he had, and whether or not he had touched the body of someone who had died in an area affected by the disease. So if Duncan didn't tell the truth out of fear, whatever reason he might have chosen, how do you blame the hospital for not treating him for Ebola specifically?
You must distinguish between the legality of his issue at the border. He went through 5 examinations. You are interviewed before you come into the airport, interviewed, tested when you come into the airport, and the 5th stage is you sign the papers. He said he didn't know he had any signs of Ebola. He got into the country, aside from the politics of it, and he walked in the hospital with Ebola. He left out with Ebola. So they dismissed him with the disease, which means he spread the disease even more. What happened in the hospital must be separate from what happened at the Visa and Passport Office.
Okay, let me ask you about this allegation over the ZMapp drug.
And I might add, the attempt to discredit him and make him a criminal is a way of justifying his not getting first-class treatment.
Well, and
if he's a medical refugee, the fact of the matter is, we're paying a big price now for not having treated him when he first came into the hospital.
Right, and I don't think necessarily that he's treated as a criminal if he didn't disclose all this information, so much as whether or not he was treated correctly. But I want to ask you about the allegation over the ZMapp drug. It was given to 2 American missionaries who contracted the virus and recovered. Duncan was not given ZMapp, and in your blog you state this. You say, quote, "The use of ZMapp raises the question of privilege. Is it only those with better connections to positions of power who will get a fighting chance to receive this experimental drug?" End quote. But in that blog you didn't mention that the missionary couple who was given ZMapp, they were given it around July 22nd. According to the hospital, ZMapp was not given to Thomas Duncan because it was not available since August 12th, and he first showed up at the hospital in Dallas on September 20th. Instead, he was given an experimental treatment of some other antiviral drug. The question is ZMapp being withheld from patients because of their skin color or because of availability?
I'm not sure. There are those who argue that there were no ZMapp available. We tend not to believe that. But ZMAP is not the only remedy. There is the recovery in Nebraska, the NBC Newsman. There are those recovering in Nigeria, and recovering even some within Liberia and even Guinea. We don't have ZMAP. So ZMAP is a preferred medicine because it works so well in the case of Emory University. But he went for several days. When he was turned away from the hospital, he got no treatment. He came back, he got no treatment for about 2 days. He was in isolation and on a water drip. Until we took the protest public, he began to get some treatment that was working. As a matter of fact, when we talked to the doctors last Tuesday, his temperature had come down, his blood count had leveled off. He was in fact improving, but that was extreme trauma to the kidney and to the lungs infection, and that could not be overcome. So by Wednesday morning, he died. But clearly, his getting late treatment and little treatment was a big factor in his death.
At some point, was he given antibiotics by the hospital in his first or even second visit to the hospital? My understanding is that in his first visit, he was given some antibiotics and then sent home. Is that not correct?
That's our understanding, but antibiotics is not the answer to the issue. First issue is hydration. He came in, he left after 4 hours on a gurney. He was very sick. He came in with 103-degree temperature and had all the signs of Ebola having come from West Africa. Did not get a thorough diagnosis. The result is that those who treated him as having flu symptoms, they contracted the disease. Even if this were a misdiagnosis, then they put themselves in jeopardy by not having the proper protocol of precautions. And therefore, a nurse is seriously ill today because of the treatment when he came in was turned away.
And to that point, because it does appear to be a misdiagnosis, because these staff members in the hospital put themselves in harm's way by treating him without taking the precautions. Finally, I'd ask you this: do you believe that if Thomas Eric Duncan had insurance, there's a comment about insurance here, that if he had insurance, he would have been treated differently than he was treated? And again, if this goes back to an issue of just a misdiagnosis, isn't that the real culprit here, not racism?
Well, those who have first-class medical insurance have better treatment than those who have Medicaid who have no insurance. And that's black, white, or brown. There's no doubt about that. That's why the state of Texas, for example, has access to $100 billion from the federal government, from President Obama, in Medicaid. They reject the entire Medicaid package, which would in fact help people who may have Ebola, who may have flu, pneumonia, may need mammograms, a whole range of sicknesses not being dealt with because that state rejects out of hand $100 billion in Medicaid money from the federal government.
Appreciate that.
The extent to which race will affect that, there's several things. There's race, there is timely treatment, there is adequate medical treatment, there's turning a man with 103-degree temperature on a gurney. All of the signs that should not have been missed.
Absolutely. The signs should not have been missed. Certainly they were, and the end result of that was tragic. Reverend Jackson, thank you for your time. That is civil rights activist Reverend Jesse Jackson. Thank you.
And thank you so much for sticking with us, and welcome back to the show. Now, a man's death aboard a plane from Africa briefly sparked an Ebola fears in New York City recently. MSNBC blames the Second Amendment for the Ebola outbreak. That's right, it's those gun lovers. You did it. Suspect hospitalized after gun battle with police in Marysville. I mentioned about a shooting incident lately at a school. Well, we had another shooting incident as well. This all came within the last 2 weeks over here, which is rather absurd and intense, and we usually hear about this breaking news and crazy events of violence in other places, but now we're getting it in the greater Seattle area as well. Apparently this is something that's not just limited to other parts of the nation or other parts of the world. It would appear that this is a world systemic breakdown crisis, and we're all kind of in this mess together. So there was an individual, like I said, started out over in Granite Falls, Washington, went from there with his AK-47, I believe it was, or it may have been another weapon, assault weapon, and was shooting at police and whatnot at a course of what would be 3 different police stations. He was going on a spree, and later he told the police that he was trying to have the cops kill him. It was his way of committing suicide. So this is crazy because we see suicide on the rise, we see whatnot increasing in tension, and a lot of folks are going to want to die when life gets so bad. Even the Bible discusses people praying for death and whatnot when times get really that hard. But anyway, nonetheless, we are approaching times as such when people just are finding reality too much to deal with under the circumstances. They never foresaw the things happening to them, their children. Some of you are losing your home, losing your wife's futures, your businesses that you worked decades for, that your parents handed to you of decades of their work, and now you're watching your kids or your family, your wife, maybe you, sticking a needle into your own arm, doing heroin, smoking methamphetamine, just laying under a bridge these days and just not dealing with reality as life is, well, collapsing upon you and around you. And it's unfortunate, but tossing in the towel and giving up is not going to be the answer to the crisis either. So we have to deal with reality. So take down your number 12 flag, people, and start dealing with reality. And be like these African American gentlemen at the beginning. Humble yourself. Admit you were wrong. You supported the wrong folks. And this is now what you're getting. This is, well, we're getting what we deserve, many of us. Now, I know there's good people out there watching this show, and I want to make this clear. I do feel for you. I feel for your families. It's people like you why I make this show, why I go on a whim and do what I do to educate and help the world, why I give my speeches, why I organize, why I debate with these and haggle with these politicians and this and that. It's for you decent people out there. It's for the future of America. It's for your children. It's for those that still care for America and whatnot. And I know there are those of you that are out there that are in military and other positions and places, and just people just trying to have your basic job and do your thing and pay your bills and get through. And many of you are just trying to just not get in the way of the system. And if you think that if you just stay out of the way of the government that you'll be okay, but I can assure you, you won't be okay. They're coming to your door. They're going to tax you to death. They're going to bring problems to your door. Many of you will lose your jobs, lose your homes 5 years before you even had them paid off. After 20, 25 years of paying on them, you'll be right there, just right there, getting ready for retirement victory, to see your 401ks, pensions, retirements, savings account, futures, and homes go up in smoke. We're on the brink of that happening. Over the next 4 years, as I stated to our state representative the other day, Elizabeth Scott, I said, I can assure you, with all due respect, Madam Scott, the next 4 years will be more decisive, and we will see the political dynamic change more over these next 4 years than we have over the past 40. So, interestingly enough, also speaking of what would be our representative, some of you had the opportunity to see her and I on what would be the corner of Highway 9 and 530 together in Arlington a couple of weeks ago, in unity together. That's right, a Republican that's elected at the state level, and myself, which is a independent what would be party candidate that will be soon to be candidate running for Congress. So I think this is shaking what would be our congressman here somewhat, Representative Rick Larson, that prides himself on being so, quote, progressive, unquote, as he sees what would be the Republican and independent parties setting aside their issues and differences and standing in unity for the people, for the greater good, for the general welfare clause as defined within the preamble of the Constitution. So, and I will say this on the record, I only voted 2 places this year on the ballot. They were for state variables. And I voted for what would be Elizabeth Scott for state representative. That was one of the folks that I voted for. I also voted for what would be our other state representative here, which happens to be a Republican as well, but it has nothing to do with what would be party. I didn't vote for them based upon party. I voted for them based upon their voting track record, and I think that they have what would be a great deal of good to bring the citizens of Washington State. So, when I find someone good in the government, I stick with them, I support them, I fight for them, and I recommend you do the same thing. Now, what happens when you ask Harry Reid how he got so rich? Well, you may be manhandled. Let's find out for yourself and watch what happens when you talk to Senator Harry Reid in a way in which his goons do not like. And we'll see you right back after this break. Thank you.
Senate Republicans, Madam President, are addicted to coke. Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader who won't shut up about the Koch brothers and their wealth, was curiously silent when asked about his own personal finances. Reid's latest financial disclosure shows his net worth as high as $6.7 million. He even lives at the Ritz-Carlton when he's in D.C. But how does someone who was born into poverty and lived off a government salary most of his career manage to get so rich? Well, it's a question that just might get you attacked by one of Reid's goons. Seriously.
Hey, Senator Reid. Hey, sir. Introduce myself, Jason Matera. Hi. How'd you become so rich working in government? How does someone on a government salary most of their career accumulate your type of wealth? Are you pressed? What? Are you pressed? No, what are you doing? Are you pressed? What are you doing holding me up like that? I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. Jason Matera? Yes, Jason. Capitalism. Seriously? You're gonna do this? Yes, I'm pressed. You're gonna do that to press? You don't care. You can rough up people like that. You don't care if you're pressed. What's your name, sir?
And welcome back to the monthly report show here for November 2014 at nospennewssource.com. Now, Joe Biden, our vice president, his son was discharged from the Navy recently after reportedly testing positive for cocaine. That's right. So if you want to know why he's over now helping to take over the oil fields and go against Russia, well, the military didn't quite work out for him. Cocaine got in the way, so now he's just being a thug like his daddy and Obama. Alrighty. Now, CDC director says leave the borders wide open. We can track potential Ebola patients, according to Dr. Frieden, which also claimed Ebola is, quote, not a significant threat, unquote. U.S. tanks arrive in Latvia to ward off perceived Russian threat. There is no Russian threat, folks. State House shootout. Pennsylvania lawmakers exchange gunfire with would-be robbers. That's right. Literally 2 days after my event, in which I was forced to have a use of 45 with, and I might as well go on to the story here in a moment, since we're now talking about these lawmakers. And I guess there's something happening lately with those lawmakers and folks associated with government having to use a firearm in self-defense. But anyway, there was 2 lawmakers nonetheless in Pennsylvania in which were fired upon, and they were forced to retaliate by using their firearms as well. In the process, nobody was actually shot. The suspects in which did try to rob and shoot these lawmakers of what would be the state of Pennsylvania were apprehended and are being charged, and justice is being served, which is nice to know, ultimately. So that was 2 days after my event. Now, my event, what happened with me, what happened as I walked my dog? Well, I'm not going to go into all the fine details, but I will say this. And I'll even discuss what would be the police conduct regarding this as well, because this needs to be stated. Everyone knows, first of all, I'm not against the police. I'm not against the government. I'm not against blacks. I'm not against Democrats. I'm not against gays. I'm not against a lot of things. I have my own beliefs. I have my own things in which I believe are better or more right. I believe in the scriptures and the Bible. So therefore, I have a stance in which I take regarding legislative actions, regarding what would be gay rights or abortion or things. But at the same time, it's not up for me to judge whatnot. It's up to the Creator. So being someone who's creating legislature, someone who wants to be involved with this and is shaping the political dynamic, I try to leave my bias out, my beliefs out as much as I can, and allow what will be the science and facts to speak for itself. And I think that that's what most of my constituents and people want, just like you folks watching the show. If you are coming here because you hope that I'm a Republican or hope that I'm Democrat and hope that I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, this is not the show for you. If you're coming here because you like the fact that I'm independent, unbiased, and trying to allow the facts to speak for themselves, then this is definitely the show for you. And you will come to like me. You will come to like this show if you haven't already, because I really do seek the truth. And if I make a mistake, I let you know about it. I don't just stick with the mistake. And I think that that is a very important and unique variable for what would be my website, nospinnewssource.com, and this monthly report show, along with the blog and the announcements that I make. Now, on my Facebook and Twitter, I show you the spiel of articles coming at you from every which way, from the right to the left, to the fringe, to conspiracy theory, to very mainstream. I give it to you every which way. CNN to Fox, to prisonplanet.com, InfoWars, WorldNet Daily, RT.com, to whatever. But my spiel and what I give you here, I tend to try to give you the facts and then allow you, with the combination of those news articles, the information and video footage and things I provide you here, and life's experiences and circumstances to unfold, and then you, what would be the viewer, the individual, gets to decide and be the judge for yourself, who you're going to vote for, what you believe the Constitution states, who's right, who's wrong, so on and so forth. Now, with that being stated, I was walking my dog recently down a dark alleyway in a small little town that's known for being very peaceful. You don't hear about people pulling guns in the town that I live in. You don't hear about stuff like that too often. So, but anyway, nonetheless, an individual came running up on me, accusing me, threatening me, yelling at me, was going to attack me. And when I announced I had a firearm, he didn't care and made a remark that was obscene and continued to proceed toward me. It wasn't until the laser from my .45 was on his chest in which he saw that, and then he began to think twice, and circumstances began to unfold and go a different way. So long story short, what would be the victim, which was me, is unscathed, okay, and it was the victimizer, it was the bad guy that was forced to leave, was forced to take off. And he became very enraged once he realized I had the gun, and then I was actually willing to use it on him, and he had nothing he could do but either walk into my bullet and take that .45 or walk away. And he chose to walk away at the very end. But it came very, very close, and I thought I was going to have to shoot him. I was prepared to shoot him. I said in my back of my mind, Lord, 2 more steps and he's back in your hands. I carry a .45 pistol. It's a car with hollow point shells and a Crimson Trace laser sight, so I know where it's going to land. I don't have to, I can be in a dark alley. I know where I'm shooting. So ultimately, that would have been a very bad evening for him. And don't get me wrong, it wouldn't have been pleasant on mine either to have shot the man. But nonetheless, the Second Amendment, the Constitution, justice prevailed. Now, let's talk about how the police of Arlington, Washington, what would be administered law. An officer came to my home after I was the victim, after I called the cops and explained what just happened to me. I had to pull a gun and please come here quick so we can find out who this bad guy is. What did the police officer do that came here? Well, his name is Officer John Stone of Arlington, Washington. He's a low-rank peon officer. I don't expect him to be around too much longer with the budget cuts and things coming down the pipeline and circumstances. I'm sure they'll toss his ass out soon over the next 4 or 5 years. He may be living in a van, him and his family and whatnot, statistically probably more likely than many of us. But anyway, out there in the world. But anyway, this officer came to my home and questioned me. Instead of going after the bad guy, he began to question me, asked me what the law was regarding stand your ground and self-defense laws. He began to insinuate and directly state that he would, quote, hate to have to take an innocent guy like me to jail just because folks in Olympia, the Democrats, are trying to change these gun laws, Kari, unquote, this and that. Well, he even stated as well that, you know, if it was a MMA professional fighter, 6 inches taller, this or that, then he could see it a little bit more to pull a gun, so on and so forth. But we have not just what would be laws on the books of the great, wonderful state of Washington that I reside in that are enabling someone to use the Second Amendment for self-defense, but we even have, it goes further. We have a law called Stand Your Grounds. Now, what is the Stand Your Grounds law? What is that right? That means you could be at a public park or somewhere. You don't have to have a MMA professional full contact fighter that's 100 pounds of muscle more than you, or someone armed with a baseball bat or this or that. When someone comes up to you, you don't even have to feel threatened for your being. If someone tries to use force and tries to remove and get you out of a public park or place, which is public and not private, you're on a sidewalk and somebody thinks you're just going to come over there and gently nudge you off the sidewalk, even if you know they can't hurt you, but they're trying to physically remove you, you have the right to stand your ground. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to shoot them down. So, instead of this officer making sure I was okay, instead of this officer giving me a pat on the back and saying, well, I give you credit for at least waiting to the last possible second to try to shoot the guy, instead of giving me credit for going by the rule of law, even under the heat of the moment, instead of that, like I stated, the officer began to play with my mind, question me, insinuate and literally state that he would hate to have to take me to jail, this and that, based upon provisions in the law that alleged quote-unquote Democrats may be trying to come up with in Olympia. Well, let's get something straight, Mr. Johnstone. And this message is from me to you, buddy. Or any other crooked cop that's out there, or person that's out there not going by the rule of law. According to the laws that are on the books, now, not proposed, not someday by Democrats in Olympia. Right now, buddy. The Constitution, the Second Amendment, stand your grounds, laws along with self-defense applies and are on the books. So I don't give a rat's ass of what proposed legislation may or may not in your puny little mind come down the pipeline that could someday allegedly or not potentially affect a guy like me. I'm stating right now, the law is on my side. The law is on the side of the American people. And any cop that does not go by the rule of law, the type of police that pull people over for smoking a joint of marijuana in an alleyway, for going 2 miles an hour over the speed limit, the type of cops that'll bust your balls for something like that, but will stand idle and allow our president, Barack Hussein Obama, to destroy our economy, way of life, to take away what would be the rights of the constitutional rights of the citizens of the United States, the one that you supposed to serve and protect, Officer Johnstone, or any scum like you. Let's get something straight, buddy. You are not on the side of the American people, and I'm not on your side either. Cops like you can get ousted and cut out of the budget sooner than later, as far as I'm concerned. And I have no problem assisting you with that, Mr. Johnstone. Now, other officers of higher rank are much more respectable. Folks that know me and go back years. We have decent folks. I do not look at the Arlington Police or any police department or officer of law as my enemy. I look at them as my friend. But individuals such as Mr. Johnstone, even if his intent was well-meaning, and it may have been, I think that the guy just doesn't want people like me serving my own justice, protecting myself. He knows once somebody like me, a public figure, shoots somebody in an alleyway and defends myself, he knows other people are going to start playing Clint Eastwood too. Well, guess what? If these thugs know you're going to act like Clint Eastwood and blow their head clean off, well, guess what? They'll think twice before they come for your wallet. They'll think twice before they touch your wife. They'll think twice before they come into your home and violate you. And that's what these asshole thugs need to know. We're not messing around. If the police won't defend us, my shotgun will. My AK-47 will. My sniper rifle, my .45 will. And it will. I assure you. I didn't use my phone to call the cops. I used my gun first. Then I called the cops later, as according to the rule of law. Now, I'm not going to rant and go on too much more about this, but I will say this. If officers like Johnstone, and I know you and what would be colleagues of yours are going to watch this video, if folks like you are going to be police officers and you're going to bust our nuts every time we do something a little over We go 2 miles over the speed limit. We park 28 feet instead of 30 feet around a corner of a curb or this or that, around a turn. If you're going to bust us for doing that, then you better also be there to protect our rights. And what would be go against folks like Obama and your Congressman Rick Larson, which have capitulated to this economic mess and literally are funding ISIS, terrorism, and things overseas. So police officer that's telling me that I'll watch out before I defend myself and use the law on my side is sitting there allowing the president and your congressman to bring in ISIS to fund terrorists that are going to be killing here in America soon. I got news for you, buddy. I got news for you. Now, you better think twice before you come to my house and violate my rights again. Because next time, if you think this is being hardcore, I won't be so gentle. I will use you for a soccer ball, and I'm going to hit the goal. Now, you know how politicians are about tossing folks under the bus, buddy. Now, let's get something straight. Moving onward. Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch states that we now have confirmation that ISIS is in Mexico and whatnot, and we need to discuss this and whatnot. So, speaking of ISIS and Congress and government and crooked cops allowing this to happen while they come for us small pickings, let's check out this video and think about this one. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Tom Fitton, who is the president of Judicial Watch and the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Corruption Chronicles. Tom, good to have you take the time on a Friday night.
Oh, you're welcome, Lars. Good to be with you. Important stuff to talk about.
Yeah, there's a story that's been percolating for the better part of a week, and I get emails from people all the time saying, well, there are these ISIS fighters who are coming across our border, that they have a presence in Mexico. And a lot of these I hold back on till I see something from a source that I trust. Well, I trust Judicial Watch. Are there, in fact, ISIS fighters in Mexico, and are they, in fact, coming across our border?
Oh, we have no doubt. We've confirmed that just the other day. We reported, following Duncan Hunter's claim, who's the congressman from California, that 10 fighters had crossed the border. We confirmed 4 fighters had been picked up by federal authorities and other officials with the Texas Department of Public Safety in near McAllen in Far Texas. And there's no doubt that's taken place. Our sources are golden. And Duncan Hunter, of course, is being attacked for highlighting this issue. But I have no doubt his sources, are kind of matching what we're hearing too.
So where are the other 6? If 10 came in and 4 were picked up, I can do the math on that. Where are the 6?
I don't know. And although, Duncan Hunter talked about this prior to our finding out about the 4, so we could be talking about 14 different people.
Oh boy.
Which raises additional questions. I think the administration's in cover-up mode. They're making a mental reservation about these terrorists they're picking up and pretending they're not, quote, connected to ISIS that allows them to deny these claims. But we know what's happening is true. Our sources are impeccable. I'm sure Duncan Hunter's border sources or Border Patrol people who are telling him this are not lying to him. And it's about time the administration own up to what's going on at the border. Because I don't know about you, Lars, I fear that the situation is accelerating in the sense that our enemies understand there's a limited frame or time frame to get across the border, infiltrate the United States, because they probably sense what Washington is pretending is not going to happen, which is going to be a significant reduction, an increase in security, reduction of crossings, and an increase in security at the border due either to the terrorist threat or something like the Ebola epidemic.
Well, like you, I've watched the development of the Islamic State, and I'm not going to call myself an expert. I get people like you on who are the experts, but it struck me that this is a group that seems to want to be deliberately provocative to the United States. In other words, they behead somebody and they say, this is a message for you. So a group like that that's provocative has to also realize that at some point you're going to see the beheadings stop having the kind of shock value that they have. It's happened before. Nick Berg was beheaded and Daniel Pearl were beheaded, and it had a tremendous shock value, and then the shock value declined, and then the number of beheadings declined as well. So if the group is really trying to provoke the United States to sort of prove its bona fides to the rest of the Islamic forces within the world, this is a way to do it. And getting fighters within the United States and perhaps having them carry off an act of terrorism with the United States would be extraordinarily bold, but it would also seem like it would be in keeping with their approach to this whole problem, which is, let's provoke the United States.
Well, this is the thing that's going on here, is that we're ignoring this threat. Everyone knows about it. Anyone who's around the border understands what's happening, but Washington's ignoring it. And I think you're exactly right. We've got a major issue going on, and they see an opportunity at the border to come in and make a statement that may otherwise be lost on Americans. As you point out, the sixth poor soul is beheaded on video in an orange jumpsuit by a man with a mask on. Compare and contrast that with the horror Americans saw with the Muslim who beheaded their grandmother in Oklahoma. What if other things? And of course, in Australia, there was a mass arrest of people because authorities picked up on the fact that they were going to do a mass beheading operation in Australia using ISIS supporters. Our information is that these guys were planning car bombs. Our separate report ties, people should go and look at this, these Mexican cartel operatives to these Islamists who are on the most wanted terrorist list, and meetings taking place that we found out about, and the government now is following up on. This is scary stuff. They were talking about bombing Chicago, bombing in Texas, all over the place, in Houston and Fort Worth. And federal law enforcement are pursuing the leads that we're opening up for them.
And why? What could be the explanation for people whose job it is to guard the safety and security of the United States to ignore these obvious warning signs?
Well, thankfully, the guys on the ground aren't ignoring it. And some agencies are better than others in following through and following up. But it's the typical Washington story. The bureaucracies put politics above public safety. I mean, there's a Washington Post report this week about the Secret Service and the White House having information about scandals involving prostitutes, all of that which impacts security of the president and the White House and others, and compromises the country generally, given the potential for blackmail.
Well, listen, I appreciate
that report being suppressed because of an election year.
Well, and this is what I worry about. But beyond getting the information, and Judicial Watch, and I'm talking to Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch tonight, beyond getting the information, what is it we can do, or your organization can do, to provoke this administration into some kind of action? Because obviously they're happy to just ignore these threats.
Well, I think your listeners need to get on the horn and alert their members of Congress to start taking this seriously. And they can't rely on the administration to tell the truth here. And they need to do and demand more security at the border. First of all, it follows that we get better security given the national threat or international threats we face. And given the specific nature of the threats that we're uncovering, they really need to act. The idea that the border is unsecured, in theory, is a terrible situation, and we know that's true. But now that we know these specifics of the terrorists actually crossing and organizing in Mexico, we got to take action. And what we can do, and what we're doing, is getting the word out and issuing that clarion call to pay attention. And like I said, there are men on the border who are doing the work, trying to stop bad things from happening, but they need our support. We're boosting their morale by getting this information out there. But just remember, they're being threatened with arrest and getting intimidated if they tell anyone what they're really up to in terms of the great work they're doing defending us.
Tom, thank you so much for the time. I very much appreciate it, and have a wonderful weekend, and stay on it.
and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much. Now, Ozzy Osbourne, musician of Black Sabbath, states, quote, "I really love being sober," unquote. Supreme Court sides with abortion advocates in Texas blocking law that close clinics. Bikers versus ISIS. Dutch motorcycle gang gets their green light to fight Islamic State. Hercules actor, quote, stated, "Being a Christian in Hollywood, you get attacked," unquote. The U.S. Sixth Fleet flagship docks in Georgia after entering Black Sea. Secretive X-37B military spy plane could land in California, or excuse me, did land in California, what would be 2 weeks ago. Dick Cheney stated we're in a dangerous period, more threatening than pre-9/11. Voice print harvesting, the next frontier in data privacy war. According to this, what would be October 13th article of Reuters, corporations, governments, all kinds of folks are harvesting information and what would be the voice print. Kind of like folks want your thumbprint or your social security number or this or that. Well, they're trying to create your voice print as well, according to this Reuters article. Very, very interesting. Now, $900 million. The general feeling, well, this is all very interesting here. Before we go into this article, ISIS sexual enslavement of Yazidi women helps Muslims avoid sin, according to these Wahhabist extremists. The ones that we funded, according to Hillary Clinton at the beginning of the show, and we're still funding now, yeah, those ones. So, I mean, they tell you President Putin of Russia is bad, President Assad of Syria is bad, Gaddafi, deposed Gaddafi that we murdered off, is so bad and evil. But then you look at these ISIS folks, and these folks going back, it seems like to me we're in bed with the more evil out of the ones. U.S. Marines run massive drill to prepare for Ebola pandemic spreading across America. I guess Pasi Comitatus, that's now gone too. Israel-Palestine draft joint Ebola response plan. That's nice. We need Palestine and Israel to start working together. CDC now considers everyone who cared for Duncan, the Ebola victim, potentially to have been exposed, unquote. A new experiment has shown that atmospheric oxygen can be created without plant life, possibly explaining the presence of small amounts of what would be oxygen on the planet Mars. Now that's exciting, because if we can create oxygen and do some things through certain methods and whatnot chemically, then this could enhance the ability to create and colonize Mars and things in the future and whatnot. And I really hope to see the United States government funding what would be a space program, isotope economy, and I want to see United States astronauts colonizing Mars, hopefully landing on there by no later than 2030. The UN pushes a global New Deal. I wouldn't quite say this is Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, folks. More like a New World Order governance New Deal. Pepsi and Coke are taking a hammering in Mexico as junk food tax starts to bite. That's right. The more taxes you increase on the people, the more harder it is to spend, and therefore less jobs. This doesn't make sense to many to many liberal Democrats. And I try not to put down people. I try not to say the Republicans think this way or do this, or the Democrats say or do that. I try not to do that because I don't want to offend people. I've got good friends and viewers out there that are diehard loyalists, Republicans, Democrats, what have you. So I'm not trying to distance myself from you or put you down or this or that, but it is interesting. I try to show as well the variables on both sides, and it's stereotypical, but when I say this, but many of the Democrats think that the more you increase taxes, the more money you'll have, and therefore that's going to stimulate the economy. But I don't believe that robbing Alice Cooper at gunpoint and taking his $50 million and dispersing it over the city of Arlington is going to be what actually makes the city of Arlington business thrive and do good. So I don't believe in that at all. But I don't also believe, let's get this straight, I don't believe in trickle-down economics either, crumbs off the table, which many of the right-wing GOP crowd do believe in. So I guess that does make me a very interesting, unique individual, and that's probably why I'm an independent. So it kind of distances me from some of those blessings and financial benefits and help and assistance of running a campaign. If I were a said Republican or Democrat, then I'd have the blessings and factors of those parties. But I like to do what's true, what I believe in is right, and so on and so forth. So here we go, and on with the news. What would be the CDC states 150 people enter U.S. per day from Ebola-stricken countries, or 4,500 people per month, and that would be a 2-week-old figure as of November 1st. No Islamic State fighters coming from Mexico, Homeland Security states. So we have sheriffs, we have head Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, we have other folks stating that we have ISIS in Mexico and even already in the United States that have crossed the south border, and evidence that they found. But according to folks, other folks, there's nothing to worry about. Wonder who we're going to believe, Homeland Security or the actual law enforcement and folks that are down there dealing with this issue and mean well. I think I'll believe those guys because they actually mean well and they're doing their job. What would be Homeland Security to scan federal computer networks without prior authorization, nurses to the CDC, wrong, U.S. hospitals not prepared for Ebola. The FBI defends secretive spy program in appeals courts. New York Times, some may carry Ebola without even showing any symptoms at all. Now that's scary, according to the New York Times article, and also they're stating that this isn't a 21-day incubation period. It's actually up to twice that, up to 42 days and whatnot. It could live in the semen for at least 45 to 60 days as well. So this is a very, very dangerous and scary situation. And even if this Ebola thing is being overhyped, there's a potential that something else could pop up in the United States, something more deadly. There are some folks even talking about what would be weaponized rabies Ebola, as crazy as that sounds, and I'm not stating that's going to happen in the United States, but I do want to state it here on the record before anybody else does, that the potential is there. And they have weaponized many germs over the years, ever since the 1980s at least, successfully, and potentially before. They've been working on it. Funding, and Congress has even funded this going back since the 60s to be able to target certain ethnic groups and be able to release biological diseases in which only affect certain ethnicities, as crazy as that sounds. So court throws out case against TSA nude body scanners, New York Times, and whatnot. Stephen King states that the world is starting to look like George Orwell's 1984. That's interesting, isn't it? And whatnot. So let's take a look at what would be this factor of if Ebola was deliberately released, who controls it, and whatnot, and I'll check you back after this break.
Nothing could have prepared me for Dr. Death's unrepentant manner.
We decided to find those organizations in the world that could help us with technology, and of course they were mostly in the UK, in America, odd few stations in Europe, and we then visited these places, explained to them what was our problem, what our problem was, and then of course we told them what the information that we needed, and we then eventually got some of the information from them. The rest we bought, borrowed and stole. Strangely enough, in America and in the UK, the help that came from there was ideological.
Did you know David Kelly? Did you have a relationship with him?
I met Mr. Kelly on three or four occasions from a pure information exchange point of view. The little contact I had with him, I found him to be an intelligent, honest, keen fella who really cared about his work.
Did you ever meet him in Porton Down?
that I can't answer. But we did meet him on a few occasions.
What was the extent of Vassan's relationship with Kelly and the West's most secret military labs?
You were able to visit Portendale, Fort Detrick?
Yes, we did that.
I wonder if you could talk about it.
No, I wouldn't like to, but I mean, the next question that I get asked is who arranged it and why and what and where, and then, I already have hassles with the UK and the American governments. I don't need any more, thank you. That's enough for me. But suffice to say, we went there with no objective of ever doing any damage to either the UK or the USA. Our sole objective was to make sure or to determine what they could do to help us and how we could enhance our own program based on their knowledge.
The people who knew Larry Ford, his neighborhood, they had no idea what he was up to, that he was working with the South African germ warfare program. Larry Ford was messing around with chemical biological warfare.
Larry was a wonderful fellow, mad as a hatter. He used to rock up in South Africa, having flown intercontinental flights with a trousers pocket full of goodies in sealed vials that he claimed were new and wonderful organisms and could do the most wonderful things on Earth.
Larry Ford had mutated cholera, typhoid, anthrax, botulism, bubonic plague, and had also come up with germs that he called kaffir-killing germs. Kaffir, as you may know, in Afrikaans, is the equivalent of the N-word. So these were germs that were specifically engineered to kill only black people.
In other words, an ethnic biological weapon. Had Project Coast really gone this far?
From the beginning, this idea of can we find a way to control the size of the black population was considered one of the most important areas of research. It got even more important over time as the size of the black population and the seriousness of the uprisings increased. So that's one reason why they got into genetic modification, research into is there a way to have contraceptives that could somehow basically sterilize blacks without them knowing it, and kind of all kinds of what at the time, or in hindsight, seemed like pretty far out research.
There was some talk about an ethnic weapon. Project Coast working on, it was called Black Bomb.
That was great, yeah. That was the most fun I've had in my life. That whole episode of the ethnic weapon was very well set out in court, in the court papers. What happened is we had the objective to synthesize a certain protein that was in sperm for contraceptive purposes. The objective was that if you could immunize a woman against sperm, then you would make her infertile. We were asked to do this by another country who had a population explosion problem as part of exchange of technology. They were giving us other stuff. They asked, well, we haven't got the time or the place to do that. Would you guys do that?
And welcome back to the monthly report for November 2014 at nospinnewssource.com. I'm your host once again, Kari Ilonummi, and onward with the show. Now, I just recently wrote what would be my congressman a letter, an email. I just did this about a week ago, and I would like to read that to you right here, right now, today, if I may. So this is what would be the letter in which I gave personally to Congressman Rick Larsen of the 2nd District of Washington State, which is approaching election, and what would be, if he gets reelected, which I believe he will, this will be his 8th term in Congress. So he's already been there for 14 years. So the message subject, quote, will Congressman Rick Larsen allow the president to bring in diagnosed Ebola cases to the United States? The president himself right now is considering to bring non-American citizens with Ebola to the United States in order to be treated in our medical facilities. This is illegal, goes against all protocols, and would be a huge mistake. Now, I know, Mr. Congressman, that you pride yourself on being progressive, and trying to create the public image, posture of distancing yourself from the Obama administration. But to this day, your voting track record would clearly illustrate another story of history entirely. We look to you for leadership and find none. If you had 10% of the integrity in which you should have, you would lead the Democrats in a charge against President Barack Obama and push forward articles of impeachment in the House of Representatives upon re-election and convening in January of 2015. But I'm not holding my breath waiting for that one. So here we stand idle, watching our leadership strip away our rights to freedom and prosperity as we see record low turnouts for voting and record high numbers of what would be hard drug users, food stamp recipients, and discontent with government by the people. You will be remembered as the congressman that supported the worst economic and war policies of Presidents Bush and Obama. What a legacy to have. When more local businesses fail, and you are no longer viewed as someone who can bring jobs and money to the area, you will be tossed out of office. Supporting jobs for illegal citizens and yet imposing tax increases that destroy the jobs of your very own constituency and base of supporters is morally and ethically wrong. My forecast is by 2018, you will be voted out of office and will be left with a legacy that will leave you in shame and shambles. May God have mercy upon you, Mr. Congressman, because I have a funny feeling that your constituency is about to put their pain and personal frustrations upon you. Sincerely, Kari Ilonummi of NoSpinNewsSource.com. And that's my letter to what would be Congressman Rick Larsen, which you can find on my blog as well. On the website NoSpinNewsSource.com, you'll be able to find a copy of that and my monthly blog called The Lowdown. That's right. So for those folks out there that don't want to watch a 2-hour show or an hour show, you can just get the lowdown. Real quick, real easy, on your iPad, on your phone, on your computer, on your way to work, and just simply read the blog once a month and know what's going on months and years before most other mainstream and folks even know in your area. Now, 2 years out, polls are showing Hillary Clinton is the 2016 favorite. Look at that. Once again, that's fitting within what I said. Hillary Clinton is going to be your next president. And I'll say this on the record. I will bet money Hillary Clinton is going to be our next president. Do I like and support her? No. But now she's went along with Benghazi. Now she's stated that she's against Glass-Steagall to a bunch of bankers at Wall Street. She's pretty much has the green light and the blessing of the New World Order now. And she has some serious issues in which she wants to prove things to men and things too. So I think she'd be more likely to drop the bomb on Russia than even Obama would. So Biden blames United States allies in the Middle East for the rise of ISIS. Report, Obama has missed over half of his second-term daily intel briefings. California breaks drought record as 58% of the state hits driest level. Pentagon official states the president is lying to America about us and about ISIS. AmericanActionNews.com. Eternal Affair, Beijing warns foreign countries not to meddle in what will be Hong Kong issues, and the biggest bank in the United States, J.P. Morgan, has been hijacked and hacked. What would be hacked rather, and J.P. Morgan Chase, and admits to the breach of about 76 million households' personal information and whatnot. So here we go at the end. We're at that point in the road, folks, when we have to say enough is enough. We have to start becoming American and set the little variables aside. Check out these videos. Spread this word to your friends and family. Like us on Facebook and help us to get this machine up and rolling. I'm Kari Ilonummi with NoSpinNewsSource.com. I will see you for December. God bless you. Talk to you later. Have a good day.
We begin tonight with this question. Who is truly running the war against ISIS? President Obama or his generals? The question is important because we have the commander-in-chief saying no boots on the ground.
As I've said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. The boots on the ground have to be Iraqi.
What about
boots on the, and in Syria, the boots on the ground have to be Syrian. The notion that the United States should be putting boots on the ground, I think, would be a profound mistake, and I want to be very clear and very explicit about that.
The president says he's being clear, but it seems as if the president's assurance isn't very reassuring, because over and over, U.S. generals seemingly contradict his statements.
Chairman Dempsey, do you believe that it will take, in fact, take some ground troops inside Syria to destroy ISIS?
Air power alone. First of all, there's no military solution to ISIL. I have military-only solution, okay? Secondly, there's no air power alone solution to ISIL, either in Iraq or in Syria. And so the answer is yes. There has to be a ground component to the campaign against ISIL in Syria. And if there are threats to the United States, then I, of course, would go back to the president and make a recommendation that may include the use of U.S. military ground forces.
Mr. Secretary, I think I heard you clearly and concisely say we are at war and everything is on the table. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And then there is Army Chief General Ray Odierno, who was quoted in the New York Times saying that he believes the war will certainly require ground combat for any chance of success. As to U.S. ground troops entering combat together with Iraqi units, he stated, quote, "I don't rule anything out. I don't ever rule anything out personally." Now, to be clear, every time these generals or admirals make these statements, the White House and the Pentagon come back to clarify the statements, saying that military boots on the ground will likely need to mean other boots, not American. But make no mistake, American boots are on the ground right now. As Hagel revealed, almost 1,600 trainers and advisors have been deployed to Iraq. Defense officials say that they are receiving combat pay at this time. Earlier, I was joined by former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. I first asked him if there isn't always tension between the commander-in-chief and military brass.
Well, it depends on the situation, Ben. In Vietnam, when the military and the President Johnson, shared the same objective, namely not to have America lose its first war, then they were together in a very deleterious way. Right now, with respect to ISIL, or whatever people want to call it, there are tensions, and that's mostly because the White House, Obama, Susan Rice, the Samantha Power up there at the UN, all the people that Obama is listening to, they don't know diddly about military affairs. And so when General Dempsey feels it necessary to discharge his duty not only as the primary military advisor to the president, but also to the Congress representing the American people, he's going to tell it like it is. And the way it is you're not going to win, you're not going to prevail, you're not going to dismember or defeat or downgrade or whatever, however alliterative our president wants to make it, without boots on the ground. Now, whose boots?
Well, obviously a good commander-in-chief listens to his generals on the ground, but it feels like in this case that these generals are directly contradicting the president here. It seems like every time he opens his mouth, they come back out the next day or the next and say, let's clarify or let's make it clear where we stand on this. Am I wrong here?
If you parse it carefully, they will say they're speaking from the same script. The president says, no boots on the ground. General Dempsey says, no boots on the ground now, but if I feel boots are required, I'm going to ask the president, in effect, to reverse his stand about no boots on the ground. Now, read between the lines. Dempsey knows full well boots on the ground are going to be required. Now he says, well, they'll come from other countries. What countries? What countries? They're depending on the Turks. The Turks wouldn't even join us during the first invasion of Iraq back in '03. Paul Wolfowitz went to Ankara in high dudgeon and said, you got to join us. At least you got to let our troops come through Turkey. And they said no. So the Turks are playing a really interesting game. Without Turkish boots on the ground, American boots on the ground are going to be necessary. And remember, we heard it first. This is a fool's errand, an unnecessary escapade. And U.S. troops, U.S. men and women are going to be dying. out of this poverty draft that we have where, quote, nobody important's son or daughter is engaged in this poverty draft producing a volunteer army. That's not what America is all about. We should be ashamed of that.
Let's, to your point about whose boots on the ground, let's take a look at what House Armed Services Committee Chairman Congressman Buck McKeon told CNN last week. He said, our military commanders have all laid out scenarios where we need more troops. If we don't put boots on the ground, we can't form the coalition. The question I have for you here is, when members of Congress are out making the case in public on behalf of the generals, so the generals seem to do it somewhat, but the members of Congress seem to be making their case as well, is there a public relations war that's being fought here over strategy?
Well, it's the same situation as when the president decided he'd put a surge into Afghanistan. He was very poorly advised, and what's happened in Afghanistan you can see. So he's being very poorly advised now to think, well, he can put these troops, or he can put military Apache helicopters and that kind of thing in, but he just doesn't really have to get involved. And then when he doesn't get involved, he'll be berated for that because they'll pin the loss on Obama. So he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't, and he has no good political advisors to advise him about that and to tell him, look, Mr. President, you can say no boots on the ground forever, and when the boots on the ground become necessary, it's going to be U.S. boots, and then you're going to have to swallow hard and let that happen. Otherwise, we're going to lose earlier than later, which we will inevitably do anyhow. That's what Dempsey is telling him. Dempsey, I think, is hanging around only to prevent worse from happening.
Former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, thank you so much for your time.
Most welcome.